It's season 4 of the Mother's Quest podcast. At time of recording where I live, we're on the threshold of spring, a season of new growth and fresh opportunities. Around this time 3 years ago, I was visited by 2 birds trapped in my house, and letting them out became a sign for me to slay my self-doubt and choose into living what I now call my epic life. I could never have imagined that day that 3 years later, I'd be releasing my 58th podcast episode, building community with over 600 members of our Facebook group, and welcoming the 4th cohort of incredible women into my Mother's Quest Circle experience. If you find yourself on the threshold of powerful shifts or new creations blooming in your life, and hearing this message feels like a sign to you, I'd love to support you. Follow the prompts on the show notes for my Mother's Quest Circle or Spark Your Epic Life coaching series, or email me at julie@mothersquest.com to learn more about how we can work together. Now, on to the show.
Hi, and welcome to Mother's Quest, a podcast for moms like me ready to live our own truly epic life. I'm Julie Neal, a life and leadership coach, community builder, writer, and mom to 2 high-energy boys who challenge me to grow into my best self. I'll be right there. Where was I?
Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the 4th season of the Mother's Quest podcast with Avanti Kumar Singh, a physician, teacher, and guide with a unique ability to open our minds and help us find the healer within through Ayurvedic medicine. The inspiration for this episode with Avanti came during a car ride last August from Camp GLP, Good Life Project, to the Newark airport with 2 friends I attended the weekend experience with, Lizzy, Russinko, and Judy Zinnato. We were exchanging notes about our favorite workshops from the weekend and all the lessons we learned when Lizzy shared the life-changing wisdom she gained from hearing Avanti present. Judy and I were both so sorry we had missed it, and I vowed in that moment to do my best to connect with Avanti and to share her wisdom with you. The conversation, 8 months in the making, did not disappoint. Before I share more about what we explored together, I want to introduce another powerful Camp GLP speaker, who I did have the honor to learn from live that weekend, Alexis Vernon, with this episode's dedication.
I'm Alexia Vernon, a transformational speaking and business development coach and author of the book Step Into Your Moxie, Amplify Your Voice, Visibility, and Influence in the World. I'm honored to dedicate this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast to Avanti Kumar Singh. I've had the pleasure of supporting Avanti as a speaker, course creator, and thought leader. Her message that the real healer lies within all of us is so needed at this moment in history, when too many of us, particularly moms, have outsourced decision-making about our bodies, our babies, our family health to outside experts at the expense of trusting our own intuition. As a speaking whisperer to coaches, consultants, entrepreneurs, and business leaders who want to use speaking to spread their important ideas, connect with their dream clients, grow their revenue, and advance their thought leadership, one of the most important facets of my work is showing my clients how to fall back in love with their voices, unapologetically speak up and out for the ideas and issues that matter most to them, and integrate my coaching and recommendations with their own inner knowing. In addition to honoring Avanti, I dedicate this episode of Mother's Quest to my mom, Diana, who showed me from an early age how to recognize and respond to the voice of my intuition and speak with moxie in all areas of my life. Whether I was speaking up about sexual abuse or shining a light at my school about human rights violations as a kiddo, or negotiating for higher pay, launching my business, or inking a book deal or juicy corporate speaking contract as an adult, my mom's influence has always been front and center. I hope you enjoy this interview with Avanti. Actually, I know you will. And as I say in Step Into Your Moxie, may you use your voice and influence to reshape policies and practices you disagree with so they more accurately reflect your values at work, in your community, around the world, and in your family.
Thank you, Lex, for this beautiful dedication in honor of Avanti and your own mother, Diana. I've been learning how to step into my Moxie through your inspiration and teaching. And it's clear you've made a mark on Avanti because her ability to tap into her own inner wisdom to help us find ours shines through in this episode. I loved the journey we explored together, from the impact of her own mother and the Indian traditions that shaped her healthy childhood, to the health crisis that happened for her while studying to be an emergency physician, and how that created a spark moment that brought her back to her roots and Ayurveda. Touching on each epic guidepost, Avanti shares how Ayurveda can become a powerful lens for living a healthy, reflective life, one where we open our minds and tap into our own ability to provide counterbalance to the things that are troubling us and support our own healing. Within that frame, we touched on so many topics, from Ayurveda and parenting to menopause, intermittent fasting, and how to support our children as they transition to college and beyond. Avanti gives us a challenge to explore our daily routines, identify any trouble spots, and then apply the teachings of Ayurveda to craft our own remedies. And after we finished recording, Avanti offered to share an even deeper exploration of Ayurvedic principles, give us space to ask her questions, and share what we've uncovered about our daily routines through a masterclass that we'll be offering later this month. Sign up for email updates at mothersquest.com or join the Mothers Quest Facebook group, and you'll be notified on the date and time so you can register to join us. This conversation is just the beginning for how we can tap into the power of Ayurveda in our own healing. I'm feeling so grateful to start along this path with Avanti as our guide. I'm Julie Neal, and this is Mother's Quest. Avanti, welcome to the Mother's Quest podcast. So happy to have you here today.
I'm so honored to be here, Julie. I'm so glad that we could finally make this happen.
Yeah, it's funny. I was saying that with most of my guests, I have this intuition that we're meant to have a conversation. And so I'll reach out. But it's very rare that the interview actually happens at the first time that I connect with someone. So I think you and I have been back and forth for about 8 months. I went back to look today.
We have been.
You know, I always trust that the conversation is going to come at exactly the right time. So I look forward to seeing what unfolds for us today. And I'm sure the message will become clear.
I'm sure it will. I'm excited.
Well, the first question I like to start with for every guest is, tell me a little bit about your own childhood and the impact that your mother has had in shaping who you are today.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And of course, it's the hardest one. It's the first one, reflecting on your own mother. You know, so I am first generation here. My parents immigrated here from India in the late 60s. My mom came here when she was just 19 years old and had me 2 years later. So she was very young when she had me. You know, for my parents coming from India, they came here because they wanted a better life for themselves and to access more opportunities. My dad came as a scientist. And the thing that they wanted the most was for me and my younger sister to attain the highest education that we could so that we as women could always be independent and stand on our own 2 feet. So I would say that the way that my mom really shaped me was having this deep desire to learn as much as I could, to pursue my dreams, which from a very young age was to become a doctor. I really set my sights on going to medical school probably at the age of 10 and then really confirmed that while I was in high school. That was my sort of laser focus. And she really supported me in going after that. You know, my parents came here with nothing. And so, you know, my sister and I knew that all of our education was paying for that and all of that kind of stuff was going to be all on us. And I think that she also shaped me because what happened for me transitioning from Western medicine to now Ayurvedic medicine is that when I first started my career in emergency medicine, which is what I trained in, I actually got really sick and I got very, very disheartened by the type of medicine that I was practicing and really had to take a hard look at, you know, what was it that I wanted to do with my life? What kind of medicine did I want to practice? And I walked away from my Western medicine career and years of training and study. As I said, that journey started for me when I was 10 years old. And I think the way that she influenced me so much, especially in the work that I do, is when I was sick, when I decided to leave Western medicine, I started to reflect on the fact that for the first 18 years of my life, while I lived at home, I had great health. I didn't have any medical problems. I never took any medication. I never had any health issues. And it wasn't until I went off and lived on my own, and really when I went to medical school, that my health started to deteriorate. And I think I started to see that the way that I was brought up with Ayurvedic principles, which are very entrenched or ingrained in our culture and South Asian culture. My mom came here as an immigrant, but really tried to stick to many of those ways of life and ways of doing things without me really understanding that they were necessarily Ayurvedic principles, but it was just a way of life. And I think when I started to reflect upon that later on in my life and my career, I realized that that way of living actually was what had kept me so healthy, in every realm, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. It really had kept me so healthy up until the age of 18. So I think that actually that pivotal moment of understanding my mother's influence in my life and the way that she sort of raised me, that took me back to, well, wait a second. Let me look at that form of healing, that system of medicine as perhaps the answer, and for myself, but also for the kind of medicine that I wanted to practice, that I had always wanted to practice. So I would say that's probably a huge impact that my mother had on me.
I'm curious what her reaction was when she learned about your pivot.
Oh boy. Well, both of my parents, they kind of had to sit down and were just like, wait, what are you doing? They were very concerned, obviously, and scared, nervous. How are you going to make this shift? How will you be able to support yourself? I mean, I am married. I have a husband I've been married to for 23 years. But still, this idea of, you've worked so hard in this other profession, or, as a Western doctor, you're just going to walk away from that. So they thought I was a little nuts. And, I just had to say, it's something that I'm not sure. I actually said that to them. I'm not really sure how I'm going to make things work. But I'm open to that possibility, because what I'm doing right now is not making me happy and is literally feels like it's killing me.
And how do they feel about the path you've chosen now?
I think they're still at times, as all parents, and I think especially immigrant parents, they are sort of like, wait, I think you should still go back and, practice medicine or, Western medicine. My dad is always saying, you could just open your office or go join that hospital or whatever. And I always just giggle because it's been over 10 years since I left. So they're always, bringing that up. But I think that they finally see the impact that I'm starting to have, because I teach so much and I lecture so much and I travel to do that. I think they're starting to understand finally the depth of my knowledge and the depth of my passion really for what I'm doing. And they see how happy I am and just excited I am, which I didn't have before. So I think they're starting to shift.
It takes so much courage, I think, to chart a new path. And that's part of why I created Mother's Quest, is so that when any of us are taking those first few steps, we realize that we don't have to do it alone and we can find the support of other people. When you made that decision, tell me a little bit about, where did you find your guides, or how did you figure out what those first steps are? And what did that path bring you in terms of how you're manifesting your mission today?
So I would say I started by looking at my sort of immediate, circle around me, which would really be my family, being South Asian, and that this form of medicine came from India. It was a little easier for me to access that. So I did look to my mom. I looked to other aunts and uncles who were interested in Ayurveda. And quite honestly, I just started doing a lot of reading on my own and studying. And it was really interesting because as I read more and more, sort of the light bulbs would continue to go off. And I'm like, oh, wait, we did that. Oh, that's why mom did that. Oh, now I understand why, my grandfather, who I call Babaji, he had passed away around the time that I made this transition. And he lived a very Ayurvedic lifestyle. So I was also reflecting on many things that he did while I was growing up, when we would visit him in India or when he would come and stay with us. And so all of these daily practices, the ways of living, the ways of eating, I started to see in the research and the reading that I was doing about Ayurveda, I saw that I had lived those principles. And so for me, I think that was really sort of how I started down the path. And then I had to look at the practicality of, I need to learn from some teachers. And so I actually found, a program in the United States that was specifically for physicians, because I had already done all the anatomy and physiology and all that kind of stuff. And for me, it was more about learning a different system of medicine and a different way of looking at things. And so I started that was my next step, was to get more formal training. The second step was Ayurvedic training. And then after that, I started to apply the principles really in my own life. Before I ever saw anybody, before I ever actually gave this advice to another human being, I actually practiced it myself again and started to heal myself. So I think that would be the path that I took. And then eventually went into yoga therapy for my own, again, self-study for about half a year. And then I joined a yoga therapy program at 3 years. And I just got certified as a yoga therapist last summer.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
I love so much about what you just shared about your path. One of the things that's really striking me is this realizing how much is already within us, what we already know, and bringing that to awareness. And then also, your commitment to actually putting these things into practice, integrating it into your life, and then using that as a springboard to helping other people. And I love that you're still learning, that you just had this accomplishment with your yoga certification.
Well, it's interesting because I was actually at a conference this past weekend that I was speaking at and teaching a lot of yoga teachers. It was a yoga therapy specific conference. And I was reflecting on my plane ride home on Sunday evening and actually writing an article for my website, for my community. And I was reflecting on the fact that I had gone there as a teacher, but I realized that I also am a student always, and that I was able to learn so much, not only from the students who attended my workshops, but also from the other teachers who were there. I feel like I got more than I actually gave in a way. So I'm a very active learner, and I love just, adding to my knowledge bits and pieces as I go, and then putting it into practice, really contemplating what does it mean? How does it fit into sort of my worldview? But I would say that I love to learn, and that I would say that I'm very committed to always trying things and applying them to myself first, because I think that when you can speak from your own personal experience, there's a lot of power to that. You gain a lot of credibility with other people, and they feel more comfortable trusting you to guide them, right? Because that's all I am. I'm a guide. And so they put their faith in, okay, well, this is somebody who can guide me. And I think that then empowers them to actually access the wisdom that they have within, if that makes any sense.
It makes total sense. So powerfully.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting ready to launch my spring cohort. It'll be the 4th cohort of the Mother's Quest Circle, which is a program I've created based on my own experience walking this path now for a few years. It really is. I'm a facilitator of that process, but I really hold that each person in the circle has the wisdom and the resources within themselves. And it's really just creating the opportunity for pause and the space for them to get in touch with that and to reflect it in one another. So I completely resonate.
Right. And I find that I think just, being in a space like that with other people, whether it's one person or 15 people or 100 people, when you have somewhere where people can ask you those questions that then bring up the information that you already have within you, it's so powerful to watch, to witness, really. You ask the question because you're trusting your own instincts as a guide or as a facilitator. And you just see this light coming from them as they realize that they actually have the answer within them. You're just helped drawing it out of them. Amazing thing.
And so interesting to see how that can apply to somebody's health and wellness. Mm-hmm. So I want to transition now into asking you about how your worldview and the ways in which you are a guide to people in their own healing, how those show up across what I call the epic guideposts. And epic is this idea that we've been talking already about, our lives being a journey, that we're the author of our story, and that we can really say yes to our callings, as you have so powerfully done. But it's also an acronym mnemonic for the guideposts that I think help us to live a life of meaning, especially in the years when we're raising our children. So I'd love for you to first give me a little bit of a frame about, what is really living an Ayurvedic life. And then I'm going to ask you to share how that reflects on each of the guideposts. And the first guidepost is E, which stands for engaging mindfully with our children.
So I'll start with what an Ayurvedic life is. An Ayurvedic lifestyle or a way of living is being one with nature. And nature is everything living, non-living, animate, non-animate. It's everything that exists in the universe. And so the basic principle in Ayurveda is that when you live in harmony with nature, with your environment, and I'm using environment as everything that is in your life, that when you live in harmony with that, you can maintain optimal health and vitality. And so really that's what Ayurveda is centered on. It's not just about what are you eating, but it's also about what are your relationships like? What kind of work are you doing? What is your physical space? It's about looking at every aspect of our lives and how that factors in to our overall health, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. So that's really sort of the frame that I actually view everything from now. And I think I actually did that when I was in medical school as well. But I think that when you're in medical school, as you go through your training, it sort of gets put to the side because you're in a very specific way of looking at the world, which is very quantitative. And these other things that you want to think about, that's not the focus of how you're trained. So I've almost had to retrain myself to look at everything this way again, if that makes sense.
And then there are these elements. Can you explain what the elements are?
Yeah. So, Ayurveda is based on these 5 elements. So again, if we're one with nature, the idea is that we are a microcosm of the macrocosm or the universe, and that the universe and everything in it is made of the 5 elements, which is space or ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And everything is made of a unique combination of those 5 elements. And so the idea is that if everything in the universe, including human beings, are made of the 5 elements in different composition, then we must be one, right? And when we live as one or in harmony, we have perfect health. So that's the idea of the elements in Ayurveda. And the idea also is that when you can try and maintain balance within your own composition of the elements, that again is when you can have health. And that comes from being in harmony with the environment around you. So again, microcosm of the macrocosm.
Okay, I'm looking forward to digging into this in a way that feels practical. And so I think that as we look at each of the guideposts, as much as you're able to give examples from your own life about how these elements come into play or the practices that you grew up with and now how you've integrated them back into your life, it'll be so helpful. So let's take the first one, the E, engage mindfully with our children. How does this perspective about life show up in your parenting and how you're raising your kids?
I think it becomes a philosophy in a way, a perspective or a frame or a lens almost that you view parenting through, and how you're imparting wisdom and lessons and helping your children learn lessons from experiences that they're having. And so I think there's the lens that I have of everything in your life is affecting you in some way. And it's very important to consider how those things are affecting you. So for example, when I'm sitting with a client or a student and trying to figure out why are they having a certain symptom that they're having, it's not as simple as just saying, well, let's put a name on a diagnosis or an illness. That's not the purpose in Ayurveda. It's more, let's look at all these different factors and think about what could be contributing to the fact that the symptom is showing up. The symptom is an indication that there's some sort of imbalance happening within you, right? And so I would say the same thing is true with raising children. And it could be positive or negative, or actually, I don't like to look at things as positive or negative. I always talk about things being health supporting or health weakening, because that's different for each person. But when you see your children having things happen in their life or things showing up for them that are either health weakening or health supporting, I start to look at what's happening for them from that lens of viewing everything. And so asking them questions that, for example, if my daughter, who's now 17 years old, she's a senior in high school, it's a really stressful year applying to college, and if she's having a headache, let's say, it's not as simple as just giving her some medication, right? It's about stopping for a moment and asking her some questions. Where do you think that headache's coming from? Can we talk about what's going on? What happened today at school? Or, how have you been feeling about X, Y, and Z? Or, have you been taking time for yourself? All of these different questions. And I think the purpose of me doing that is so that I'm also helping her practice asking herself those questions. So when she goes off into the world, in a few months, when she goes off to college, she will be able to start problem solving in this way, right? And she'll be able to look within for the answers rather than always looking outside of herself, if that makes sense.
It does. So powerful. I'm curious about how transparent you make that with her. Are you hoping she will just it'll just become a part of the way she thinks, or do you point those things out to her?
Well, I think now at the age that she is at 17, and she's also, both of my children, my son and my daughter, they both have been at home with me long enough as I have made this transition of observing how I live and how I'm doing things and what I'm doing, that I think they almost know that they sort of know, okay, well, here goes mom. She's going to ask me all these questions. But it's really interesting because you see that they actually start to practice what you've taught them. And it comes out in the most interesting ways. So I'll give you an example. My son was home for spring break from college just a week ago. And I was talking with my husband and we were reflecting on, the fact that he is very stressed and had just come off of midterms. And he was telling us small things that he had done. But then we were observing when he was at home, how he was eating, how he was managing his emotions, how he was asking for what he needs. All things that he learned to think about when he was living at home with us. And he didn't have to say to me, Mom, this is because you asked me all these questions. It was almost instinctual. And that's when you're sort of like, as a parent, okay, all of those years of them just being, rolling their eyes at you, Mom, you're going to ask me these same questions again, blah, 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 blah. You feel like, okay, it was all worth it. So
right. It's just a little sign that those seeds you were planting have really taken root.
Right.
Well, let's move to the next guidepost, P, which stands for passionate and purposeful. And this is about the impact that you're making in the world beyond your family. Tell me about how this perspective is influencing your career now, and also how it has supported you as you've stepped into this path.
So I would say that the way that it's impacted, the work I'm doing in the world is that it's the lens that I look at everything through. And this idea that you have the healing power within is sort of the central theme to my work. What I decided a few years ago that I was going to move away from working directly with people one-on-one, because I take a lot of time to do that. And there's only so many people I can see in a day. And what I decided was that the more effective way for me to sort of spread this idea that healing comes from within and that we all have this healing power, and then also in the broader sense, talking about an Ayurvedic lifestyle, talking about Ayurvedic medicine, was to touch as many people as I could and have a ripple effect. And so that is what I see my impact as. So I spend a lot of time educating graduate medical students in all different, forms, allopathic, chiropractic, whatever it is, nursing students, yoga teachers, yoga students. I spend a lot of time talking to them, even high school students. And I talk to them about these different principles, about different tools within Ayurveda and yoga therapy or yoga, and how that can affect their life and their health. And as far as educating graduate medical students, I want to educate them in the sense of not trying to change their mind, but opening their minds to the idea that there are these healing systems that exist. And 1 in 3 patients that comes into your office is already using some form of traditional medicine. And as a practitioner, as a physician, it is your duty to at least know about those things, to understand the perspective that your patients are coming from. And so I think that really is the impact that I'm trying to make as I move into this phase of my career and my work and my purpose is to help create a ripple effect of this understanding.
I like to talk often about what I call these epic snapshot moments where time slows down and you see the impact that you've been wanting to have, in almost like in Technicolor, and you want to bottle it up. I'm curious if you have a recent moment where this work that you've been doing, especially to educate medical practitioners, where you really saw that, again, taking root with your students.
Yeah. So I think the one that just sort of came to me right away, I was actually teaching medical students, 3rd and 4th year medical students on a rotation, doing a lecture on Ayurveda, a 2-hour lecture. I mean, there's only so much you can teach them, right? And it was a small group, probably maybe 10 medical students, all in their 3rd and 4th year. Many of them were in their 4th year and had already decided what specialties they wanted to go into. But they all sort of self-select into this rotation of integrative medicine, and Ayurveda is one of the topics. And I remember talking to them about this idea that 1 in 3 patients is going to be using these other healing methods. And it's up to you to make sure that you actually have learned a little bit, or at least can open your mind to these practices so you understand your patients better. And I got so many just wonderful questions from them. And we started talking about yoga and meditation and all these things that there's a lot of study, that there's a lot of scientific data that's been recently published and is sort of top of mind for all of them. They started asking me a lot of questions about that and how does that fit into medical care. And I could see sort of in Technicolor, some of the walls come down. There were a few students in there who really weren't sure of what to think of me or to think of what I was talking about. And there were a few who were totally on board. That was I was talking to people who already were there. And I think it's just, you energetically can see these walls coming down when, again, the light bulbs go off and they see how they can apply it to whatever specialty or whatever field they're thinking about going into, how it could help their patients in the future. And you see just that earnestness at that point in your career when you're a 3rd and 4th year medical student. You are still very optimistic, I think. It's when you get into residency that it becomes harder sometimes to stay that way. But you can see that enthusiasm, and they're so eager to learn anything they can that would help their patients. I think that would probably be one of the times that I can think of just recently.
Just the walls coming down.
Mm-hmm.
I love the way that you're framing it, in that they almost have a duty and responsibility to learn about some of these practices and to better understand their patients.
Yeah. And I'm always really clear with them. I'm not here to change your mind. I'm not trying to make you believe something. I'm here to open your minds up. That's really my purpose. And I think right there, a lot of walls will come down, because I'm not, somebody that's, trying to push something down their throat or say that, my way or my perspective is the right way. That's not what it's about.
I can see that perspective. I'm also holding for the parenting picture. If I just let my children know when I'm wanting to explore something with them that I'm not interested or trying to change their mind, but just want to open it.
Mm-hmm.
Take that one too.
Absolutely.
So the next guidepost, I, stands for invested in yourself. And this is about, self-care, also personal growth and learning, and building in time for the things that bring you joy. I'm wondering if we could spend some time here talking about how you invest in your own health. Mm-hmm. And if you can even touch upon how, some of those elements that you mentioned, how does that show up in how we care for ourselves?
So I would say that, again, I really try to practice what I preach. And I'm also very gentle with myself about trying to be perfect, because I think there is a little bit of that. First of all, personality wise, I'm very type A. Going into medicine, I think you have to be quite type A. So that perfectionist tendency of wanting to do everything exactly perfect or exactly how I've thought about it in a routine for a day. And then also wanting to always be an example for what I'm teaching, right? So that can sometimes be a little hard. But what I've learned to do is really to be kind and gentle with myself and realize that I'm also a human being. I'm doing the best I can. And that this is about practicing to the best of your ability every day to take care of yourself, whatever way that looks. I think that the most important thing that I have taken away from Ayurveda and this sort of lifestyle is that your daily routine, what you do daily, is the most important thing, right? You can always add things here and there, which is that piece of not having to be perfect. But there are some basic sort of touch points throughout the day that I use to anchor my day, and also as checkpoints for me to say, am I taking some time to take care of myself? So routines are a central part of Ayurveda, and it's also the foundation upon which we add remedies or ways of healing. We add them onto a daily routine.
Would you be open to walking us through your daily routine?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. So, I really believe very strongly that your day starts the night before. And this is something I often talk about with my students and clients, is that, going to bed on time the night before is just so incredibly important for your health overall. And it sets you up for what your next day is going to be like. So I'm going to start at nighttime, if that's okay. I really try to make sure that I'm in bed between 10 and 11 o'clock. And, sort of the saying in Ayurveda is that you should try and be in bed, almost asleep at 10 p.m.-ish, around the time. I'm not perfect, of course. So I just give myself that grace of somewhere between 10 and 11. I really try to be in bed. And I then try and wake up at the same time every day in the morning, which is around 5:30 or 6 most mornings. And I give myself enough time in the morning to just go a little slowly. That doesn't mean that I try and pack everything in, a meditation, prayer, everything. I try to do the best I can with my schedule, and that I have a child at home still who's a senior in high school and very busy. So I give myself that time in the morning to make sure that I can go through things a little bit mindfully and a little bit slowly, so that I can feel like I'm not just rushing into my day and taking that rushing energy to the rest of my day, if that makes sense. I feel like how you start your day really informs so much of the energy that you take into the rest of the day. So I really try to do it in a mindful way, however I can. I wake up early, and I do just have some self-care practices before showering, some things that are prescribed in Ayurveda, things like using a tongue scraper and a neti pot, dry brushing, things like that. I try to do every single day because that just helps me feel good. It's taking care of the body that I have that is going to help me do all these things that I want to do in the world. So that's how I look at that. I make sure I spend some time in silence. So that can either be meditating on my cushion, on my meditation cushion. It could be in a chair. It could be while I'm making my coffee. I try and, again, give myself some grace. I think one of the main things that I've learned is that I have sort of like a menu almost, if you want to look at it that way, of different practices that sort of fit in with things that I know really nurture me, body, mind, and spirit. So silence or meditation, I know really helps me. So I have a couple different ways of doing that depending on what's happening for me. If I can sit on a cushion for a 20-minute meditation, great, I'll do that. If I only have 5 minutes because of family members and, their schedules and all the other things that are going on, I'll do a meditation just drinking my coffee. So I think that's really important as a mother when you have so many roles and responsibilities, is to have sort of some different ways of honoring yourself and getting to the same place, if that makes sense.
It does. I love that idea of this menu of options that you pull from based on maybe what you're feeling that morning, but also what the current reality is of your life that day.
Right.
Really helpful.
Exactly. And so after that, I, have a very light breakfast. Again, that's a principle in Ayurveda that your sort of digestive fire is just starting to turn on in the morning. So you want to eat something that's easy to digest, so your body doesn't have to work quite so hard. So something that's a little easier to digest. And then I really spend the morning time. Again, these are all based on some Ayurvedic principles, which I know we don't have time to talk about, but for your listeners who do know a little bit about Ayurveda, they'll probably understand why I do certain things at certain times of the day. I try to spend my mornings following a task list, because it's a time of day that, as far as the energy of the time of day, it's not most conducive to lots of creativity. So following a list of things that you need to just get done, that's actually tapping into the energy of that morning time. So that's what I do. And I have lunch between 12 and 2 p.m. That's when your digestion is the highest. So I have my largest meal then. And then as I move into the afternoon, so the afternoon is all about creativity. So it's brainstorming, writing, having meetings, meeting with clients or doing sessions with clients. And then the evening is really about sort of winding down from the day, family time, relaxation. Bedtime then is really about getting ready for bed, having some time for reflection and prayer or journaling, something that sort of stills your mind. And then we're back at the start of my day, which was the night before.
I love that. Thank you so much. I feel like so many little gems or things we could try. I had a couple of reactions and questions. Is it okay if we stay here for
Absolutely.
First of all, I was really feeling great about the fact that I love using a neti pot. And I dry brush every day. I'll have to bring out the tongue scraper. That's not something I use yet, but just feeling a little bit of validation about, some of these things I've found along the way that I think have been so helpful to me, rooted in these principles that have worked well for you. So that's good. I have a curiosity about eating breakfast in the morning.
Sure.
And this is just very timely for me at the moment because I just had an annual physical with my OBGYN, who I really love. And he was really encouraging me to think about intermittent fasting. So some of my family history, I have, diabetes in the family and some inflammation. And so I posted recently on Facebook just asking for people's experience. And I must have had like 150 comments. It was fascinating. And, so many people that said they love it, but a lot of people having a lot of caution around it. And so I'm curious, from the Ayurvedic perspective, is there some benefit to trying that? Is it actually not, really important that you do eat something, even if it's small, right when you wake up? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that question.
So it's a hard question to answer because in Ayurveda, everything is very specific to people. There are some general principles, right? A framework that we can work within. Some of the things I went over in my daily routine are part of those general principles. But then, of course, Ayurveda is very much about personalizing it to an individual. So the answer to that question is not really an easy one. What I'll say is that it's exactly sort of representative of the comments that you had, which is for some people, it works really well because of the imbalances that they may have in them. And for other people, it doesn't work well because of the imbalances that they have in them and the energies that they have in them. So let me try and flush that out a little bit. For somebody who, again, it is really what are the symptoms that are showing up for you? Based on that, we can determine what energies or what elements are out of balance. And then from there are specific recommendations. So let me just put it this way. If you have a lot of imbalance with increased earth and water within you and the symptoms that go along with that, intermittent fasting usually work very well for you. because of the principles in Ayurveda of counterbalancing or doing the opposite. On the other hand, if you have symptoms that are showing an imbalance in air and space, it probably won't work as well for you. I'm not sure that that's really going to clarify.
Well, I think what it's going to do, well, first of all, again, what I appreciate so much is that, it's really what is happening in each person's body and what is each person's own wisdom about what is working for them that I really appreciate. And also, I think it will make many of us, including me, curious to better understand what these elements are and how you know if they are balanced or imbalanced in our bodies. Do you have a resource that you might direct us to that we can include in the show notes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I write a lot about it on my website. There's articles, and I think that there might be some resources specifically on this system that I sort of use. I have a very different way of teaching Ayurveda, which I think is what makes me unique in this space. It's a very practical, usable, approachable way to use the principles of Ayurveda in a modern lifestyle. That's the thing that I have heard for 3+ years of my lecturing and talking to people and doing workshops is that people are very interested in Ayurveda because of yoga, because it's a sister science. It's very, very interlinked with yoga. One and the same almost from my perspective. There's a lot of interest. And so people will try and do these quizzes online or read about it or even go to an Ayurvedic practitioner, but they end up just being more confused and they don't feel like they can actually use any of that information in a practical way in their life. So what I've been able to do, I think this is sort of my gift, is that I'm able to explain things in a way that's actually usable. There's a system that I've come up with, which I call the counterbalance solution. It's 3 steps. It's sort of a way to look at Ayurveda and apply it to any symptom or imbalance that's showing up within your system. And based on that understanding, you can then apply the opposite effect and figure out how to remedy it.
I want to delve into your epic life story so much. I think it would be wonderful, Avanti, if you're open to it, for you to delve into this a bit so that we can get a sense of how this really works.
Sure, absolutely. I would love to. I think the easiest way to probably do this is to use a common symptom that I think a lot of people have, which is anxiety. And this is one that's a little bit easier to understand, right? We all have somebody who has had anxiety in our life, or perhaps we've had anxiety ourselves. So let's use that as sort of the example. The first step in my system, which comes from Ayurveda, again, I have been able to put it into a usable system, is you want to identify the symptom that is bothering you. And that can be physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, whatever realm it's in, some sort of symptom, and you have to be able to name it. And just pick one. And again, we're starting really simple. It can get much more elaborate when you have 2 or 3 symptoms, but let's start with one. You have anxiety. And what you want to do is identify the qualities of anxiety. Ayurveda is a qualitative science. It's all about the qualities of things, hard versus soft, heavy versus light, moving, not moving. You probably get the idea. There's 20 qualities or 10 pairs of qualities. And that's something I really go over in workshops and in my online course, is these qualities and how to identify them. The qualities exist in all of nature and then can be applied to all imbalances. So you identify the symptom. This is step 1. Identify the symptom and its qualities. So we're talking about anxiety. The qualities of anxiety are very much like the element of air, which is light, cold, moving, dry. Those are some of the qualities that you can think of. And you probably can imagine how anxiety would have those qualities, okay? It's moving, it's thoughts across the mind, it's lots of movement within the body, cooler, sort of like air, and very light. It's sort of flitting about everywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it does. Okay. All right. So that's step 1. The second step is then to apply what I call the golden principle, which is a basic tenet, probably the most important principle in Ayurveda, which is like increases like and opposites reduce. So that's to say that if you have a quality of a symptom that is hot, if you add more hot to that, it will become hotter. On the other hand, if you have something that is hot and you add something that is cool or cold, you'll start to balance that out. Is that okay? That's clear. Mm-hmm. So you would apply to the symptom of anxiety, which has qualities of air, light, cool, moving. You want to then apply or cultivate qualities that are the opposite. So that principle of like increases like and opposites reduce is the counterbalance solution. So you know that to bring that anxiety down, right, to balance it out, to remedy it, you want to apply or cultivate the qualities that are opposite to those air-like qualities. And if you want to make it really simple, you could think of, okay, well, up here in air, the opposite of that would be things on the ground, right? Or the qualities of being fixed, being heavier, being a little bit warmer. Those are qualities that would counterbalance the qualities of air, the qualities of anxiety. So that's step number 2. Is that good explanation there? You're good?
Yes. I'm okay. Along and I'm loving it. And as you probably imagine, it is connecting to so many experiences I've had in my own life. I'm just thinking, for instance, about my kids. My 2 boys both have sensory issues. So they are always seeking input, moving a lot. And, so not surprisingly, this is making perfect sense, like a weighted blanket. Or
exactly.
Then for my older son, he now is in high school, but he plays basketball. The proprioceptive input of pounding the ball is actually a great sport for him because it is providing this, I'm seeing now, this counterbalance.
Yep, exactly. You've got it. And so the third step then is to pick the remedies that will cultivate those opposite qualities that you need to cultivate. And there's 3 areas of remedies that we work with in Ayurveda primarily, which are routines, or sort of that basic cycle of what you're doing every day. Then there's on top of that seasonal routines and life stage routines. But really what we look at on a daily basis is our daily routines. The second area that we look at for remedies is diet. What are the foods you're eating? What are the spices you're using? And then the third is what I call the tools of yoga. I say tools of yoga because yoga in this country has become synonymous with just the postures or sort of the physical aspect. And that is not what yoga is. Yoga is everything: meditation, breath work, posture, sound, gesture, all of those things, visualization, those are all parts of yoga. So I have sort of defined it as tools of yoga to help people widen their understanding of what yoga is, or expand their understanding of what yoga is. So those are the 3 areas of remedy. So that's the third step, is pick remedies from those 3 areas that will help to cultivate the opposite qualities. So in the example of anxiety, if we want to cultivate qualities of the earth, which is grounding, which is being fixed, being a little bit more heavy and warm, what could you do from a routines perspective? Well, the most important thing you can do is make sure you have a regular schedule. That means you're waking up at the same time, going to sleep at the same time, making sure you're eating your meals at the same time, adding some regularity into your schedule. There's a lot of people who suffer from anxiety who will automatically tell me, oh my gosh, my days are crazy. I never know where I'm going to be. I'm always moving from thing to thing to thing, which explains a lot of their anxiety is contributing to it because it's an air quality. It's just adding more air to an air symptom, if that makes sense. So that would be something from a routine perspective. From a diet perspective, you want to make sure that you incorporate warm cooked foods into your meals. That means really, really try and pull back a little bit on the raw foods. Again, I find that a lot of people who suffer from anxiety will say to me, oh my gosh, I've been having cold smoothies for breakfast. I've been having salads at lunch and dinner. That's probably adding to your anxiety. It's cold, it's raw, it's light, right? Those are all qualities of air. And then finally, the tools of yoga, I'll just make it really simple. Let's pick meditation and let's pick posture. So from a meditation perspective, if you're going to meditate upon something, on a visual, like an image that you want to focus on, you want to focus on something that has a lot of stability. So perhaps a mountain or the roots of a tree, that's very grounding. As far as a posture, right, asana or the yoga postures, you want to pick postures that are on the ground. So that means you're not going to a vinyasa flow class. That's too much movement. You want to do things that are slower, restorative yoga, floor poses, seated or supine. And when you start to do that, you are really cultivating, again, those opposite qualities to sort of ground your anxiety and pull it back down to the earth from the air. You will see profound shifts. So that's how you apply the counterbalance solution from my perspective.
I, for one, know I'm digging in more to this. I love the way of thinking and the framework. And I like that it is so holistic, that it's not just looking at diet, but there are all these different ways that you can provide a counterbalance to whatever you're dealing with. Before we pressed record, you and I both set some intentions. And one of the ones I had was getting your perspective about this time in our lives where, you know, many women are going through perimenopause or menopause. That is definitely where I am. And I'm wondering, what would be the counterbalance to that time in our life when our bodies are changing in this way?
That's a great question, and one that I'm asked a lot. So really, if you think about it, the first remedy that I talked about in Ayurveda is routines. So there are 3 levels of the routines. There's the daily routine that goes with the cycle of the sun on a daily basis. There's the second level, which is seasonal routines, which is the earth and its path around the sun. And then the third is life stage. Okay. And so the life stage is what we need to consider when we're talking about perimenopause and menopausal symptoms and sort of that time of life. It's a life stage of moving from what we call in Ayurveda and yoga, the householder stage, which is the ages from 25 to 50, which is when you are raising a family, building a career, have lots of roles and responsibilities, and you need a lot of fire, that fire element to help you do all of those things, right? You need the fire to keep you going. And so the ages from 25 to 50, if that's the fire element, as we transition out of the fire element into more of the air element, which comes after age 50, which is much more about introspection, about sort of asking those big questions of, you know, why am I here? What's the larger purpose of life? Those kinds of questions that we start to move into. There is a transition we have, which shows up hormonally within us, right? So you can think about all the symptoms that a lot of women have, that they experience, of increased fire, if that is resonating. And so these qualities of fire, hot, pungent, piercing, those are sort of oily. These qualities that you can ascribe to fire is also the qualities of the symptoms that show up in menopause, perimenopause and menopause. So applying the counterbalance would be to do the opposite. You need to cool that down. You need to slow it down. You need to make it a little bit duller. Does that resonate?
Yeah. And how does one do that?
Right. So some ways are, again, some of the similarities to some of the things we talked about with the anxiety example is, you know, trying to create a regular routine, dealing with any past emotions that you have as far as relationships with other people. I find that a lot of people, a lot of women who come to me for this have many unresolved issues with other family members or people in their life from that time period. And believe it or not, that can really, really affect their transition at this time. So dealing with that through forgiveness, through meditation, those types of practices. As far as, you know, diet goes, again, making sure you're avoiding those hot, spicy sort of foods and oily foods. So anything fried, caffeine, sugar, even alcohol, those are all going to just increase the fire and make it harder to transition. And these are all things I'm sure, hopefully many of your listeners are identifying with that these are things that their Western doctors have probably told them to do. It lines up with Ayurveda.
Yeah. And now there's a groundedness in terms of why to do these things. That makes sense.
So I think that's the routine. I talked about diet and tools of yoga. Yeah. So those are just some small examples of recommendations.
Really powerful. I'm so glad we spent a little bit more time here, and we'll make sure to get some links so that any of us that want to take your course and just begin to understand this at a much deeper level, know how to find you and to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, we're at our last guidepost C, which stands for connected to a strong support network. And that's so that we are not alone as we move down, the journey of our epic life. Where have you found the most connections to support you?
I would say probably in the integrative medicine world and also in sort of the yoga community. I find that, connection is about finding your tribe and people who are like-minded that can support you on your journey. And I think it goes beyond just even, helping to connect you with other people or anything like that. It's really about just supporting your vision, your purpose that you have, and validating where you're coming from. So I think I've really found that through those two groups of people who are in integrative medicine and then people in yoga, really understand where I'm coming from. And so it's been really great.
We're almost at the end of our time together. And before we move to acknowledgements and takeaways, one other thing that came to me as you were sharing all of this and the importance of routines is that I am very much a night owl. No matter how much I am telling myself intellectually that it's so important to get to bed earlier, and I really believe what you're saying about the importance of an evening routine and how that sets you up for the morning, I have such a hard time getting myself to do it. Are there any words of wisdom or things that you've learned maybe with some of your clients that would help those of us that just love the quiet hours of the night to stay up late?
Yeah, I think the point in Ayurveda is not to have strict rules that you have to follow. Otherwise, you won't have an opportunity or chance at having good health. I think the point here is to do the best you can. So I think, again, allowing yourself that grace, that's something that I can work towards because I know that it will be better for my health. But right now, the stage of life I'm in, right? You have younger children, Julie?
6.5-year-old and a 15-year-old.
Okay. So
but in both worlds.
Right. And so again, you are at a point in life stage, right? You have to look at the life stage where you may have more fire within you that just to be able to tend to all of your responsibilities. And you just honor that and know that that's the life stage you're in. And so I always tell people, start where you can, start where it makes the best sense for you intuitively, that you feel that you can be successful. I think that's the most important thing. And the other piece of advice I always give people is that whenever you're trying to incorporate a new habit, routine, whatever it is that you want to support your health, link it to something you're already doing. So, for example, for you as a night owl, maybe it's just trying to move your bedtime up by 15 minutes, right? And you can link it to something. Maybe, I'm just, again, hypothetical. Maybe you always have a cup of tea quite late at night. Okay, so perhaps you could link this idea of, after I have my cup of tea, I'm going to get into bed. You link it to something that you already do, it actually has a higher chance of sticking. So that would be an opportunity for you too. But I think it's about being gentle with yourself.
Okay, I appreciate that. And just
absolutely
slowly moving more towards what we think will be better for ourselves, but from kindness and patience. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So we're at the point of our conversation where you get to give me a challenge, and anybody who's listening or is part of the Mother's Quest community can say yes to that challenge as well. And we can exchange notes with one another along the way. What would you recommend for us?
I would ask that you and your listeners take a little time to look at your daily routine and just take a look at it. What are you doing throughout the day? How are you spending your time? Is there any regularity? And if there's not, if there's a lot of irregularity, can you add some routine and regularity into your life? Because that, again, from my perspective, is the foundation of Ayurvedic remedies and an Ayurvedic lifestyle. So that would be my challenge is, could you take some time, look at your routine on a daily basis, and add some regularity to support your health?
I love that. And as I often like to do, I will share this with my children as well. Mm-hmm. I'll reflect on it first in my own life and then invite them to do it. Mm-hmm. And I can see how I will naturally also maybe want to choose one symptom and see how I might provide a counterbalance and build it in as part of a routine.
Right. And so that would probably be the second part of my challenge, would be that once you look at your routine and the regularity or irregularity, consider a symptom that you've been having a challenge with or a difficulty with, and see if you can see how adjusting something in your routine might support healing it, if that makes sense.
It does. I'm excited to bring some focus to this.
Can I say one more thing about that? And on the point of children, I think it's really helpful to do this for your children too, is depending on their age, right? If they're a lot younger, like your younger child is 6.5, going through their routine for them and taking a look at it and how it's contributing to sort of what's showing up for them as far as symptoms or behavioral things that you might want to deal with. I think it can give you so much information. And then with older kids, I think actually sitting down with them and explaining this idea to them, once they kind of wrap their head around it, they'll see that there is some benefit in that. And so, encouraging them to do the same, I think is really powerful, really. And it's a powerful life skill for them as well.
Speaking of those things that we hope our children will take with them as they're moving out into college and into the world.
Yeah.
I know this is a big transition for you right now as your youngest is getting ready to go to college. What's something that's coming to the forefront for you as a result of this conversation that you may want to bring intentionality to your daughter?
I think that, your first question about talking about how my mother had such an impact on shaping who I am, sharing those stories with my children, with my daughter, especially, and not from the perspective of her then, wanting her to reflect back to me what I've done for her, not at all. But I think from the perspective of saying that, the history that you come from, the lineage that you come from, there's a lot of strength in that, and honoring where you came from. Don't forget that as you move into the world, because there's so much wisdom and so much healing in that. Because I had to wait until I got really physically sick to really spend some time really exploring that. And so I think that having those conversations would really be helpful. And so thank you, Julie, for asking me that question, because it's made it very top of mind for me.
You're welcome. Occasionally, I do offer a challenge back to my guests. Would you be willing, as I and others delve into our routine, to have these conversations with your daughter, as you just highlighted, and maybe ask her a few of the things that she knows she wants to carry forward?
Yes, I would love to. I would absolutely love to.
I look forward to hearing what comes up. Thank you for saying yes.
Oh, absolutely.
So I always end with a chance to acknowledge one another and the conversation itself for, what we are going to take away from the experience. I mentioned before we pressed record that I was just so excited, and I feel like could have seen me. See, I've had like multiple pages of notes and my mind's going the whole time. I feel like there was just so much about your journey, but then also just the content of this really unique perspective, this Ayurvedic lens that I'm introduced to now. And I know I'm going to want to continue to learn more about. So first of all, just taking excitement and energy around this perspective, which feels both enlightening in a new way, and then also really grounding in the sense that there are already so many experiences and things that I know that connect to this framework, maybe just haven't been expressed in quite the same way before. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. The second is a reminder about, how we really can be our own healers, how we have our answers within, and to take the reflective time to really look at our lives and our routines and the symptoms or things that are showing up for us and see how we can make changes ourselves to remedy them.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one, I think, is this idea of opening minds. I'm really still struck by how we don't need to change people's minds, but how we can bring these different perspectives or ways of being as something for people to think about and to just broaden their perspective. And I'm for sure going to carry that into conversations that I'm having with my children.
Wonderful.
Thank you. What are you taking from this conversation?
I think, a lot of appreciation. You asked me a lot of questions about how my perspective in my career and my work and my purpose has affected how I've parented. And I think for me, just being able to talk about that and ask the questions and then reflecting upon it has been really helpful, because it can sometimes feel like a very difficult, it is the most difficult job that you'll ever have, or responsibility or role as a parent. And so I think just taking some time to reflect on how I have raised my children, and specifically my younger daughter, now that she's going to be leaving, and feeling good about the fact that I've prepared her well to go off on her own and to fly, right? I've really done a good job. So I thank you for reminding me that and having me sit and reflect upon that. That's been really a gift. So I appreciate that. Yeah. And I think the other would be, just hearing how excited you are about what I'm doing, I think is just very validating. I find that anytime that I'm with other people, whether it's in a lecture, a workshop, or one-on-one, and they tell me that they're really resonating with what I'm saying and how I'm teaching things, it just makes me so happy, and it fuels me to keep doing what I'm doing. So I would say thank you to you for that as well.
You're so welcome. Both of those things make me so happy too. And I look forward to many more ways in which we can continue to be in each other's lives and work and support each other on our paths.
I look forward to that as well. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you so much for coming along with me on this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. I hope this conversation sparked something that will help you live your epic life. If you'd like to get show notes and learn more about the Mother's Quest community, head over to mothersquest.com. And while you're there, I would love it if you would follow the prompts to subscribe, leave a review, and help us spread the word. I want to end with some words to help light the way on your quest. Seize the day. Love your people. Honor your gifts. Until next time.